How the biggest initial public offering the world has ever seen has been delayed when Saudi Arabia said it was going to sell 5% of its state energy giant Saudi Aramco to public investors. Top stock exchanges sat up and took notice. The flotation was tipped to happen this year, but now Saudi Aramco says it needs to review its options for the listing. Well, joining us now from London is Professor Paul Stevens, a fellow at Chatham House in London. Thanks very much for being with us. So, what do you make of what's happening with this IPO, or as the case may be, what's not happening, because we haven't really heard any firm announcement from the company as to when this will be happening?
I think the problem is that they've run into serious problems, and the problem was created in April 2016 when Mohammed bin Salman first announced the privatisation, because at that point he put a valuation on Saudi Aramco of $2 trillion. This was achieved by a rather simplistic piece of arithmetic. You take the reserves, 266 billion barrels, and then multiply it by an oil price. And the oil price they took was $7.50 a barrel, which was the price that Total had paid when they bought Maersk. But the problem with that is that to say then they're going to take 5% gives a benchmark, i.e. $100 billion. And if the privatisation goes ahead and they get less than $100 billion, this will be seen as a failure. And this is bad news from MBS's point of view. So my sense is that they're desperately trying to sort of wriggle out of the privatisation process because the valuation is grossly overstated and they're unlikely to get the 100 billion. And the last thing that MBS needs at the moment is some sort of an obvious failure.
And when you're talking about MBS, you're of course talking about the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And this has been seen, this whole Aramco IPO has been seen as the linchpin of his overall strategy of reforming the Saudi economy. So could we see this as a setback for that then?
Not necessarily for reforming the economy, but certainly to make the IPO the proverbial jewel in the crown, I think was a mistake, because, as I say, they've created a benchmark by which you can judge the success or failure of this. And I think this is the reason for the delay in the process. I suspect that they're more likely to try and go ahead with a private sale, because the beauty of a private sale is nobody will know if it's failed or succeeded, because you won't actually know what the price is.
But what message is all of this sending to foreign investors, this apparent lack of transparency from the company and from Saudi officials on this?
I don't think it's particularly good news from that point of view, and indeed I think more important was the arrest in November of a number of senior businessmen in the kingdom. And this illustrates a fundamental problem in Saudi Arabia, and that is a lack of real property rights. And if you are a foreign investor, I think you're going to be looking very hard at the kingdom before putting money in there. And indeed, the private sector within Saudi Arabia will also look hard at investing within the kingdom.
And how important is this IPO to the business of the foreign exchanges that are competing for its listing, namely the London Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange?
Well, that's another problem with the privatisation, because neither would be a good place to put the privatisation into. The United States, because of problems with the Jazeera Act, which would allow American citizens effectively to sue the American government. Also, on NYMEX, the rules for listing reserves are very strict, and Saudi Aramco would struggle with those rules. And in London, as the rules stand at the moment, they can't privatise less than 25%. Now, London is trying to change those rules, but there's a lot of opposition within the institutions in the City of London opposing that. So both options at the moment are not looking attractive.
And what are the implications of this for the Saudi economy domestically?
I don't think they're that important, and it certainly shouldn't stop the process, the much needed process of economic reform that is actually underway. They were hoping to get $100 billion from the sale, but there are other sources of income for that. and therefore I don't think it's going to make a huge amount of difference to the reform programme, providing it's not seen as a failure. In other words, providing they don't go ahead with the IPO and get significantly less than $100 billion.
Good to speak with you, Paul Stevens in London.
Thank you very much.